Archana and Dan, I'm sorry I missed you
Oh,
yesterday.
Blair Miller, hello.
Well, hello,
Hello.
hello,
Hello,
hello.
dear Blair. How are you, dear friend?
Oh, I'm very good. How is everybody? Look at this
Uh,
full house. Oh,
isn't it great?
Hi, Blair.
hi.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
That's awesome.
And hold on here. So,
Hi,
Mary,
Robert.
goodness. So, not to be denied, Blair's okay. And Sarah's here. Oh my goodness.
Wow. Hi, Sarah.
Hi there. How are you,
Good
Amy?
morning,
Good.
Sarah.
Good to see you.
Oh, wow. What a wonderful turnout we have this morning. So, and it's early in Chicagoland over there, right? Was
Hey,
it?
she's worth it.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was about 4 o'clock in the morning over
Honored.
there.
hey,
So,
David up there in the,
Wow.
who
yeah,
knows
David's in
where
the
you are
Cosmos. So,
in the cosmos.
okay, well, let's get started, everyone. What a wonderful turnout. Thank you all for being here. This is the Buffalo Society for Creativity and Medical Education, and we're official because we have a logo. There it is.
Yay.
Yeah. Yeah, so gotta have a logo, right, everybody? Armand is here. Wonderful. So I just want to introduce our presenter for this morning, and then I'm going to give it over to Dr. Clymer. Uh, good morning, Armand. Dr. Amy Clymer is a speaker, a trainer, a coach, and she teaches people how to innovate on demand, as several of us here do, and many of us have experienced with. She's the author of Deliberate Creative Teams, just came out, How to Lead for Innovative Results, and it's written to help leaders understand how to increase the creativity in their teams. We're all after that. We also have our colleagues, Blair Miller and Sarah Thurber, who have also come out with Good Team, Bad Team. These are like companion volumes, of course, along with this companion volume as well. Unabashed plug for my book. Okay, all right. um, she's the designer of climber cards and creativity and team building. Amy has a PhD in leadership and change. I want to say this about Amy. Amy is in our world today. There are many people out there that are the so-called self-proclaimed thought leaders. Um, Amy is clearly a thought leader and doesn't have to proclaim it because Amy is solid. She's been doing work for years in this. And in keeping with the tradition of the Buffalo Society for Creativity and Medical Education, we bring people here that are solid, that are research-based, that are experienced, that know what they're doing. So Amy, it is an abs, and she's delightful. So it's a delight to have you with us, Amy. Over to you, Dr. Amy Clymer. Round of applause. Yay.
Wow.
All right. All right.
Thank you, Roger. That means a lot coming from you. I appreciate that. Well, hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. I'm excited about this morning. All right. So Roger asked me to come share with you all, and I thought it was super cool. There's a Buffalo Society for Creativity and Medical Education. I mean, it's so niche. I love it. Uh,
The
but it
original
also,
members are here, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like it also means that you probably have really good conversations because you have this connection and this shared interest and doing, I'm sure, amazing work. So I'm excited to hear a little more about that. So today we're going to look at deliberate creative teams, how to lead for innovative results. This is all what I'm going to share with you is just like a little snippet of what's in my new book, which Roger just mentioned. So if you're interested in the book, you can check it out anywhere books are sold. And I'll just drop a link in the chat if anyone's interested in that, and I'll put it in there again later. But all right, we are going to. Roger asked, like, "Hey, we doing introductions?" I'm like, "Oh, sure, let's do it." So here's what we're going to do today to kick things off. We're going to use a tool that I created called Climber Cards, which Roger just mentioned. And oops. All right, so here's how this works. All right, so not yet, but in a moment, I'm going to put a link in the chat, so you'll need to have access to the chat. And when you get that link, you're going to head over to this web page, and you'll see at the top of the page this question: select a card that represents one thing that helps you be creative in a team. And then you'll scroll through, there's about 50 different images, and you're going to pick an image that is a metaphor or a symbol for something that helps you be creative in a team. You'll type in your name and then just a sentence or so of why you chose that card. So how does that card connect to this question of one thing that helps you be creative in a team? And then you'll hit create response. And once you create your response, you'll be able to see everybody else's responses as well. And then we're going to use those for some really quick introductions. All right, I'm going to put the link in the chat, or if you want to use a separate device like um, a smartphone or a iPad or something, I'll put a QR code up here on the screen. All right, there's the QR code and the link is in the chat. It says Climber Cards activity. So click on that.
So anyway, we click on the card and then on the card and then that'll show a response that we write about it on your site there.
Correct. Yeah, it should be pretty obvious.
Yep, got it.
Okay, cool. Does it look like it's working?
Yeah.
Okay, I always get a little nervous about the technology, you know.
Don't we all?
Exactly. Y'all know.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, shoot. Amy, I lost it somehow. Um,
Um, you want to go to did you click on the link already?
I did, and then but I couldn't scroll on it.
Make sure you're on a browser like, Chrome or Firefox, whatever you use.
Oh,
Did you find it?
hold on.
You could always go back and click the link again. Awesome. I see responses coming in. Take a moment and read the other ones once you've entered your response. Oh, there's some interesting themes already.
Mhm.
Did you get it, Robert?
No, I always have when it comes to tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, take your time.
I see you fine, but now I don't know where to.
Um,
Said that okay,
you'll-
the climber cards activity.
yep, click on that, and it should open up a separate page for you, a browser.
Yeah, yeah, I got it now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while
Oh,
Robert's working
Ken,
on that,
like yours. That's
I'm going to give you here's the next set of directions. So we've got some really great responses here, and we're gonna just do a quick go round. And I'm gonna call on you just because it's a little easier, so we're not wondering who's going next. But just share your name and then you know, what kind of work you do. You know, I'm a doctor and da 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 da, that kind of thing. Just real brief. And then which card did you choose and why? And we've got, 15 people here. So keep those responses to about 15 seconds. So we're gonna be pretty brief. And as you're sharing, I'll make sure to put your response up on the screen or your card up on the screen so people can see it at the same time. All right. We're just going to go in order of the responses. So let's start with Ken Snyder.
Morning, everybody. Doctor and an educator of medical students. Um, I think being creative individually and being creative in a team are two very, very different things. And I think in doing it in a team when it's working well, it resonates not just with each other, but with the audience that's listening or participating in some way or who it's shared with. Again, I think of the beauty of a symphony or a jazz concert where everyone truly understands what their role is and is listening to one another and creating together. So let's say a jazz improv is the best example that I could think of.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Love it.
Sarah.
Sarah Thurber, the managing partner at Foresight, which is an assessment to measure not whether you're creative, but how you're creative. Um, and really, for me, learning about other people and what they're contributing often inspires me to recognize I have a different thing to contribute. And it is sort of the collective the collective that inspires me to create.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Armin?
Hi, I'm Armin St. George from HIA, and we are involved in patient education side of the medical field as well as medical education using author-controlled AI to reach this next generation of students and physicians.
Awesome. Thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, I'm a spine and sports medicine doc here in Buffalo, and I picked the one I did primarily because I think I learned more about being creative by listening first and not talking as much.
It's a very important skill. Tony?
Hi, Tony Pagliaroli. I'm from Hermitage, Pennsylvania. I started in private practice about 30 years ago now. Did my master's at Buffalo State and completed it in 2005. In 2010, I started my second consulting practice focused around bright lights innovations. And I've worked with a variety of different companies on creativity, leadership, change.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Roger?
Roger Firestein, I picked this card because it's fun, it's amusing. I was just delighted by looking at those guys. And so when a team is working well, it can be fun and happy and amusing. So I'm just so delighted to see you all this morning. This is just what a great way to start out a Thursday. So thanks for being here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. David?
Good morning. At least from here in the Green Mountains of Vermont, I chose this image. As most of you know, I teach year-round online, 7 months all around the U.S. and Canada. And when I look out over nature, I am inspired, and I always try to imagine that my students are going along on the trip with me.
Awesome. Blair?
Thank you. Blair, I'm a facilitator and teacher, and nature is always an inspiration for me. And with this picture, I saw diversity, common context, like a forest together with common purpose always helps me.
Awesome. Thank you. And Charity?
Hi, everyone. Charity. I am an educator by trade, and I'm in a training and development role for healthcare industry. I chose what I hope is an owl. It looked like an owl to me because I believe owls represent wisdom and knowledge, and they observe and they learn their environments. And I think that's very important for members of a team to be very aware of the dynamics and their surroundings and the group itself and how it can contribute.
Awesome. My intention was that it was an owl when I drew this, so I'm
good,
glad it's
good.
that way.
Okay.
Thanks, Charity. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Shan. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist, and my interest in medical education has shifted from medical students to residents and now fellows. As I said in it, my wife is a quilter, and I'm always struck by the fact that when the quilt is finished, it's really the piece, the unique strengths and beauty of each piece I would not have seen alone. And it's really when you bring forward those together that you get just an amazing quilt.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Anna? Oh, you're muted.
Hi, Ami.
Hi.
I hope you remember me. We met at SOU.
Oh, yes, that's right. So good to see you.
So, hello everyone, and I am a medical professor. I'm a creative medical educator working in the medical field since last 28 years. And some of you know that I am into creative teaching and creative pedagogy. So, I chose this image of guitar because currently we are working on a project of bringing music in medicine. So how I couldn't write much, but we are creating a team. We look for educators and students who have similar interest and who are really interested in bringing music in the, in the curricula. So how we are still working on that, and that's why I chose it. So I think that for creating such a team, we need people who have similar interests. Otherwise, it won't work.
Awesome. Thank you. Robert?
Thank you.
Robert. Yes. I can't see, I see the gallery now. I don't see my thing, but I guess the most important thing is I'm a faculty coach at the Jacobs School of Medicine. So I interact with our future doctors. And this is a very important topic, teamwork in medicine. And I chose, it looks like some different colored bears overlapping. And I think it was to say that as a team, we have some similarities, some differences. We have different roles and different responsibilities, but we're all interconnected and interdependent upon one another. And probably the thing that is also very important is we have the same great culture.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. Arcana.
Hi, I'm Archana. I'm a pulmonary critical care and sleep physician, and I'm also involved in medical student teaching. And I've had the privilege of initiating art in medicine in the medical curriculum. And the picture that spoke to me was the spider web. First, it represented connection that helps me thrive, and the fact that the spider silk is so strong and yet flexible, and it is sort of practical creativity where you adjust to the changing conditions. So that's the reason why it spoke to me.
Awesome. Thank you. Sharon, I know you just joined us and haven't had a chance to respond to the prompt, but if you want to at least introduce yourself and just share your name and the type of work you do. Great.
Sure. I'm having technical difficulties, so hopefully you guys can hear me. So my name is Sharon Barron. I am a nurse manager at Ocean Children's, and we are the oversight team for the Regional Perinatal Center for Western New York.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I loved I've looked ahead of time at all your creative titles, and I really love what you do. It's really cool. And I'm so much on the medical side. I don't know if people feel like this. I was kind of listening to Ken talk about music. I think for me, it's colors and nature that really kind of pull the creative back into my world after a really hard week. So if I had a tile, that's what it would be. So very bright and interesting.
Awesome. Thanks, Sharon. All right. Thanks for sharing, everyone. I think what we'll find, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you some of the research that I've done on creativity in teams and kind of what evolved. And I think what you'll see is there's definitely some connection with what you shared in your responses, in your Climber Cards responses here as with the research. But I'm going to start off and share with you a story. This is Frances. And Frances, this was her wedding day, March 10th, 1973. And Frances was particularly excited because, well, of course, she was getting married, so it was a big day, but she was also really excited because she didn't have a headache. And Frances, at this point in her life, had been suffering from pretty severe headaches for about 15 years. And she had seen all sorts of doctors. And when I talked to her husband, Ron, about this, he said that some days her headaches were so bad that all she could do was sit really still in a dark room and be quiet. But she was lucky. On this day, she didn't have a headache. So she had a beautiful wedding. But things started getting worse after. And a couple months later, at a just complete loss of what else to do, Frances and her parents got in this motorhome and drove from Orlando, Florida, where she lived, to Rochester, Minnesota, to the Mayo Clinic. And as you know, the Mayo Clinic, at least now, I don't know if it still had this, if it had this designation then, but now it is considered the best hospital in the world. And Frances had met many dead ends with talking to doctors, the general gist of the doctors was, listen, honey, you just need to relax and have less stress in your life. And they dismissed her and sent her on her way. So they got into this motorhome. They drove up to the Mayo Clinic. And when she got there, the doctors, they started doing some tests. And the main test that they did in 1973 was because they suspected she had a brain tumor. So they tested using a machine called a myelogram. Some of you may be familiar with this. And the myelogram was the way it works is you lay down on a table, they inject a fluid into your spine, and this table tilts. And as the table tilts around, the fluid goes to different parts of your body. And if the fluid hits a tumor, your pain increases. And when the fluid hit the back of Frances's skull, it was so painful she vomited. That's when they knew she had a brain tumor. Now, in 1973, the MRI machine hadn't been invented yet, but the precursor to that had, which is called the EMI machine or ME machine. And in 1973, there were two in the world. It had been invented in the UK, so there was one there, and the Mayo Clinic had just bought the second machine. They'd had it on their property for about 6 weeks. And so when they got the results of this brain tumor from the myelogram, thought, let's put Frances in the EMI machine and see what happens. And sure enough, they did, and it showed that she had a brain tumor at the base of her skull. And Frances said that when she was in that EMI machine, it was just really peaceful and calm. There was no pain. It just was dark and nice and still. So much more pleasant experience for her as a patient and also more accurate. So because of this brain tumor, on July 19th, 1973, doctors Richard Miller and David Pipegrass did surgery on Frances and removed the tumor. The tumor was about the size of a lemon. So there was no amount of relaxing and taking it easy that was going to help Frances not have pain every day or almost every day. In fact, at one point at a prominent university hospital in Florida, a doctor told her, listen, honey, if you think you have a brain tumor, you don't. And that was in 1961. So she lived with this for over 12 years. Now, at the time that the Mayo Clinic did this surgery, they had decades before invented a technique where they could test a tumor for cancer within minutes. So one of the problems in early 1900s that the Mayo brothers recognized is that if they, removed a tumor from someone and they wanted to see if it was cancerous, it would take weeks to figure that out. They'd have to sew the patient back up, and then if it was cancerous, they potentially had to go in and do another surgery, sometimes a third surgery, which is very dangerous. So the Mayo brothers hired a pathologist, Dr. Lewis Wilson, in 1905, and they charged him with the task to figure out a way to test for cancerous cells in the middle of a surgery. And he did. He figured this out. It was a little bit of an accident where he left something on a windowsill overnight by mistake, and they were able to, and the results were able to show some cancerous cells. However it happened, they figured out this technique, and because of that, they moved the lab right across the hall from the surgery wing. So they could take the cancer or take the tumor and just walk it across the hall, get it tested. They would have the results in 2 to 3 minutes. So this is exactly what they did in the middle of that surgery for Frances. And what they found was it was benign. There was no cancer. Here's her medical record from 1973. So after this surgery, Frances wakes up a couple days later. She's talking to her doctors and she says, was this really necessary? Did I need to have this surgery? And the doctor said, yeah, actually you did, because any day now you were going to go to sleep and not wake up. Well, a year later, Frances and her husband Ron were celebrating their 1-year wedding anniversary. That was in 1974. And a year after that, they had their first kid. That was me. If it wasn't for the innovation at the Mayo Clinic, I wouldn't be alive. Because the Mayo Clinic was and still is doing all this cutting edge research and asking questions and figuring out the answers that no one else was doing. And I mean, I literally owe my life to them. I will say, as a fun aside, a few years ago, I had the privilege to work with them and to teach them some creativity and innovation, and that just was really amazing experience. But for me, because of this experience my mom had, innovation is personal to me. This is super, super important. And not only are you saving lives by being more innovative, at least in the case of medicine, but you're changing lives. And Frances has had no side effects. She is still alive and well. She went on to live an amazing, wonderful life, and I am very grateful. She went on to have 3 kids. I have a sister and brother as well. So, thanks to that innovation. All right. Thanks for the hearts. Love it. So, I've been curious about innovation most of my life. I can remember even in high school asking questions about creativity. I had no clue this was like a thing out in the world that people studied, but I was the kid that if you were my friend and you said, "Oh no, I'm not creative," I would say, "What? Yes, you are. Of course you're creative." And I would get all emphatic and try to convince you were creative. And little did I know it would lead to this research and this entire profession. But let's talk a little bit about just some. I know you all know a lot about creativity, so just want to reiterate a couple things that we know from the research, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. So, a couple things we know about creativity. We all have creative potential. This is backed up by research since at least the 1970s that creativity is a skill. It's a skill that you can learn, you can get better at, you can practice it. In fact, if you think about the people in your lives that you know who are highly creative, chances are they've actually been working at that probably most of their lives, even from the time they were a little kid. Now, they probably weren't consciously thinking, okay, I'm going to be working on for the rest of my life how to be more creative, but they were just digging in and trying things. And in their experience, they probably developed a bit of a process. Um, but because creativity if you want to be creative, you need to develop this skill and you need to go about this with some intention, even if it's not thinking of like, oh, I'm going to be creative. I have developed this mantra, which you can see on this shirt that I'm wearing, and here it is on the slide, but be deliberate to be creative. This will not happen by accident. And when I do a lot of consulting work with different organizations, and this is probably the biggest gap that organizations forget or don't think about is they think creativity is just going to happen by accident. And they're like, I don't know, we never seem to have that many ideas, or we have ideas and nothing happens with them. Like, well, you have to make something happen, or you have to be intentional about developing and fostering those ideas. And this definitely, I think it in some ways becomes even harder on a team because teams are complex, because we as humans are complex. And so you get a group of us together and there's just all these dynamics, and that makes it challenging. So I want you to think about right now, think about a team that you are on. This could be a team you're a member of, a team that you're a leader of, but I want you to think about a team that you're on and maybe just like jot that down on a piece of paper if you have that next to you, or if you don't have any paper near you, just hold that in your head. But just jot down the name of that team that you're on, so that you don't forget it. All right. So I'm going to show you this progression that I've developed. That what I've seen in the work I do is that teams seem to follow along. I don't know if progression is the right word, continuum. They follow on this continuum. And I want you to think about your team and where your team falls along this continuum. So I'm going to walk through this. So when teams are trying to be creative together, or if they're not, but I would say the level of creativity in a team moves through or falls along one of these 5 stages. Not all teams need to be creative. I know, like for me, the creativity, this is what I do for a living, but I don't think every team needs to be creative. It can help in many situations, but sometimes it's okay if your team is just like at what I would consider that stagnant level. Now, I'm specifically talking about creativity. I'm not talking about the other work they do. A team could be highly productive, but stagnant in their creativity if they're just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. So if you look at that orange bar, um, that a team might be stagnant if they're really having no impact in the realm of creativity and innovation. Now, if we drop down, we have teams that I consider destructive. And these are the teams who, and you, if you're like me, you've been there. In fact, maybe like me, you even made this mistake, but somebody on the team shares an idea and somebody else says, oh no, we're not doing that. That's too expensive. Or we tried that in 1985 and it didn't work. That's a team that's destroying ideas. They're shooting things down. You know, they're keeping things at the status quo, but by not allowing those ideas to come in, they actually might be causing harm to that organization. And you can see here on there's at the right side, oops, on the right side where it says impact, I have -1x. So for x, put in a number that is appropriate for your context. That might be a financial number. That might be $50,000, 500,000, $5 million. An idea, if it was moved forward, what's the impact that idea would have? And if finances don't quite fit, maybe think about how many patients would this impact, or what other sort of change might this fit for? And so just put that number there, and that's the impact a destructive team may be having on your organization. All right, you'll see there's a dashed line there, and if we move above that dashed line into the yellow rectangle, sporadic. This is the team that they want to be created together, they have this motivation, and sometimes they figure it out, but they don't really know how they're doing it. It just seems to work sometimes, and then other times they don't. They couldn't pinpoint, what that process is that they're following. And I call this team sporadic, that they are having an impact. They may be having a positive financial or other impact on the organization, but what would be even better is if they can move up a level to that sustainable creative team, where this is the team, they get it. They know the process, they know how to replicate it. They can sustain this process over and over, throughout the years. And that team potentially is going to have triple the impact of the sporadic team. And I actually think these numbers are a bit conservative. I think the numbers could be much higher. And then finally, at the top of the scale is the scalable team. Now, this is the team that they understand innovation, they know how it works, they're motivated, and they're scaling by teaching other teams within the organization how to do what they do and how to be innovative and follow that process. I think there are very few teams that get to that scalable level. That's a pretty high level, and it also has it may or may not be necessary. It depends. Like, not every team needs to get to that level. I think what's ideal is at least get to that sustainable level. And there's a box around those top two levels because that's the goal, is to get into one of those levels. But again, in the work that I've done, I found this is pretty unusual for a team to really understand how creativity works. All right. I'm curious where your team is. I want you to throw in the chat one of these words. Where do you feel like your team sits on this continuum? So put that word in the chat. Love it. All right. Seeing a lot of sporadic, a couple sustainable, 3 or 4 sustainable. All right. So it sounds like most of you, and never, everyone hasn't responded yet, but most of you are living in that sporadic, sustainable space, which for this group actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, you all are here because you also care a lot about creativity, and this isn't your first webinar, right? I know Roger and others have taught you a lot about creativity. So that makes sense. And sometimes I will say with the organizations, or if I'm leading a webinar like this, I feel like people tend to overinflate perhaps where they sit on this continuum. But it feels like how you're responding fits with the work that you all do. Um, all right. So let's look at wherever you're at. Let's look at how to move up a level if you want, or how to be even more intentional in that level, especially if you're at that sustainable level. So I want to share with you what I found in my research of what impacts team creativity. So early in my career, in my 20s, I was working at a large research university as a staff member. And I started noticing, and well, first of all, I'll say, those of you who worked at a university, you know that if you're not careful, you end up being on lots of committees. I later learned how to say no, but initially I didn't understand that. So I'm on all these different committees, which basically means I'm on all these different teams. And I started noticing something really interesting between the different teams. That some of the teams, I felt like when I went to a team meeting and I sat down at the table with the group, I felt energized. I felt more creative just by sitting at the table with this group and because of the work we were doing together. And then other teams, other committees, I showed up and I just felt drained. I felt uncreative. It was like I lost some creative cells just by sitting at the table. And what was interesting is that sometimes there was overlap of team members besides just me between these two different teams. And so I was very curious, what's going on? Why are some teams highly creative and doing awesome work, and some teams are just stagnant and it just feels like I'm less creative because I'm sitting at the table? And I really wanted to know what was going on, what were the situations there. So I started reading all of this stuff about creativity. And eventually I ended up bumping into Roger and Sarah and Blair at the Creative Problem Solving Institute. But even a couple years before that, I maybe, like many of you, took this a little too far and got a PhD. It was like, all right, I really want to geek out on this. So the big question I had for my research is why are some teams creative and some aren't? And what's that difference between the two teams or those two different situations? So what I found in my research, um, I usually don't share this, but because of y'all's background and you all get research, I basically ended up doing a mixed methods study that created a scale that ended up measuring three elements that teams need if they want to be creative together. Okay, sorry. I just got a pop-up on Zoom that I've never seen before, and it says that you have switched to a different language. Please update if you're still speaking English. Can you all understand me okay? I don't know what happened there. Unfortunately, English is the only language I know, but okay, that was interesting. All right, so here's what the research showed. There's these three elements that impact team creativity: team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. So let's talk through these. I'll break each of these down. And I want you to think about, as I'm sharing, that same team that you wrote about, which of these do you think is strongest in your team and which is weakest? So hold that in your head as I'm sharing. All right, team purpose. This is the team's collective focus, their shared goals, and their commitment to reaching those goals. I have seen that this is probably the most direct, the most straightforward. Most people are like, oh, yeah, I get this. Most teams have figured this out, but some just have never had a conversation about it. So I'll share in a moment a way to make sure your team is clear on their purpose. But that's team purpose. The second is team dynamics, which somebody mentioned here, might have been Charity, that these are the behaviors and interactions within a team and the relationships between the team members. So this is what's happening at the table during team meetings, or even as far as what happens in the hallway after the meetings, or the conversations that two team members have. All of those different interactions and those relationships impacts the entire team's dynamics. And these are really important for teams. I think it's something most of us understand, but it's really hard to get there because we are so complex as humans and there's so many layers to us. And then that third element is the team's use of the team creative process, which is their use of tools, techniques, and strategies to be creative together. This is the area that I found most teams have no clue that there is a process for creativity. And my guess is that many of you have already, you're familiar with that. Roger, I'm assuming you've shared a bit, like they know creative problem solving.
Oh, these guys know creative problem solving.
Awesome. Awesome. I knew it. I
All of
love
them.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All of them been in a seminar, read a book or something, they're taking a course. Yeah, yeah, they're all over it. Yeah,
Sweet.
yeah. Thanks, Amy.
And that actually, just understanding creative problem solving, that's it. That's the process. And using that process and making sure all team members know it is awesome. It doesn't have to be creative problem solving, by the way. It could be something else, design thinking, human-centered design. Like they're all good, right? They're all very, very similar. So I think I'm a big fan of CPS, so I'm glad you all are learning that. It's a good fit. All right. So, given what I just shared, I want you to put in the chat, where is your team strongest and weakest? And you could just put like an S colon purpose, W colon dynamics, or whatever the response is. So where's your team strongest and weakest? Awesome. It's interesting. Y'all are kind of all over the place. This is great. Mm. Yeah, so it looks like we've got for strongest purpose, 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 process, purpose, purpose, dynamics, purpose, purpose. So a lot of teams are feeling strongest in team purpose, um, which feels like it fits with what I know of you all. And then weakest in process, process, dynamics, purpose, a little bit of everything. Cool. Awesome. Good. All right. Helpful to think about that. And there's actually the scale that I created. It's called the Deliberate Creative Team Scale. It measures this in your team because the challenge is, especially if you're a team leader, you're going to have a different perspective than everyone on the team. And so the scale, it gets everyone's input, aggregates the results, and provides, a response of where you sit on these three elements. And then you can do the work and that can change over time because it's really the scale is about team behavior and how does your team work together and what do they do together. All right, I'm going to just briefly, we only have about 15 more minutes, but I'm going to briefly talk about one thing which each of these that you can do to improve your team purpose, team dynamics, or team process. So obviously focus particularly on the one that you feel like your team is weakest on. All right, so let's look at team purpose. A couple of you said you feel like this might be the area you're weakest in. This is may sound overly simple, but it is absolutely effective. And sometimes that's the best, right? Just keeping it simple. Have a conversation with your team about what is our purpose. And one of the ways I really like to do this is to not ask the team, hey, everyone, what do you think our purpose is, and have a conversation. First, before you do that, to pass out, some note cards or post-it notes. If you're doing this virtually, there's ways you can do this with the chat. Have everyone write down their response of what they think the team purpose is. Then, after everyone's written down the response, put the post-its or the cards in the middle of the table and everybody take a look at those. You could have everybody read one out, or everyone just quietly read them and see what are the similarities and what are the differences. And if you have a lot of similarities, like, cool, wow, we're all on the same page. And in about 15 minutes, you'll just feel more confident that everyone is on the same page of your team purpose. If you have a lot of differences, then okay, let's get into a conversation about this. And depending on your meeting, you might want to delay that conversation for a future meeting, but at least you'll have the data to know, okay, we're all over the place and we need to get some clarity here. And then you can get into a conversation about team purpose. I do think that having the conversation collectively is really helpful, because what can happen is if you're like, let's say you're the team leader and you're like, oh, wow, people are all over the place. Let me just tell everyone what our purpose is, and then we're good to go. The problem is you don't get that shared commitment and that collective understanding. So having that conversation can be really, really helpful. I mean, obviously, as a leader, you can share some of that, but you want to get the collective input. And I'm not a big fan of getting really specific of like, oh, we're going to create this like purpose statement and we're going to spend weeks crafting it perfectly. If your team is interested in that, cool. Maybe because I'm not a high clarifier on foresight, I'm just like, yeah, let's just get something down, right? So just get on the same page there. Really easy figuring out your team purpose. All right, team dynamics. This one is definitely harder and takes more time. But the three elements within this that you really want to focus on are trust, conflict, and communication. I think one of the most powerful things you can do when you're looking at team purpose is to look at yourself and really paying attention. How are you showing up to that meeting? What are you saying in that meeting? What are the behaviors you're exhibiting? How do you respond to the other people on your team? And you might even think about something that I had some reflection on a few years ago is, when were you not open to an idea? So I had a really good insight a few years ago, and I was hanging out with my dad. And if my dad took foresight, which he hasn't taken, he would be off the charts ideator. I mean, my dad would spend 5 minutes with you, and in 5 minutes, he's already given you ideas for something in your life, even though he knows almost nothing about you, right? He just loves coming up with ideas. The implementation he struggles with, but that's another story. So one day we're hanging out, it's around Christmas time, we're, together for a family gathering. And, often this happens at family gatherings where you start talking about national politics or some national issue that really none of us knew much about. So we start talking about this, and he says, oh, you know what they should do? And he rattles off an idea. And I said, Dad, that's never gonna work. They can't do that. And he looked at me and he said, well, okay, Miss Creativity. I thought, okay, touche. I mean, I'm so thankful that he said that, because I realized, because he just has ideas, all over the place. I had gotten into this habit with him, this pattern with him, where I would shoot down the ideas a lot. And I mean, of all people, I should know better. And who cared? We were just having a conversation. It's not like we were doing anything about this problem. And because of my response, I'm basically shutting down the dialogue here. And so because of that conversation, I started thinking about, are there other places that I'm doing that and not realizing it? And I found that there were, and I needed to really check myself. So I want you to take a moment and think about that. When were you not open to an idea? Now, this is different than liking an idea or accepting an idea. This is a situation where an idea comes up and you're just shooting it down right off. So take a moment to write that down. When was a time when you were not open to an idea? And then once you have that written down, write another sentence of what do you wish you had done instead? Now, in this case with my dad, what I wish I had done is said something like, oh, that's interesting. How might that work? Or what might that look like? Or how do you think that would help? Or, ask a follow-up question to just get his perspective more. That would have increased the dialogue and actually made for probably a really interesting conversation because that's all we were doing is having an interesting conversation. So take a moment and write down, what do you wish you had done instead? Love it, Robert. All right. Really, as you're thinking about team dynamics, there's a lot that we could get into, but for now, just really pay attention to how you're showing up and what you might be doing with your team. Because if I was doing that in a team meeting, especially if I was a team leader, that's going to have a really big impact on my team. And what's going to happen is if I do that a couple times in a row, they're going to quickly learn, oh, this is not a place to share ideas. And that's going to really decrease your creativity and impact the team dynamics. All right, team creative process. You all are pros at this, or becoming pros at least. So the biggest thing you can do here, which you're already doing, is to learn about creative problem solving. And just curious show of hands, who here has taken the Foresight Thinking Profile? Anyone? Okay, sweet. About half of you. Sarah and Blair, they're responsible for this amazing tool. And if you haven't taken it, highly recommend it. I find that it actually really helps you understand creative problem solving at a deeper level. And it helps you understand, where your gaps are or where, you might be maybe not as effective. And then it helps you figure out how to work better with each other. I think one thing to think about when you're working on creative problem solving is what do your team meetings look like? And, where you're not always going through the full formal process for everything, or if you are, the entire process for some challenges might take 10 minutes. And then for other challenges, they maybe take a year or 10 years. It depends on what it is, right? But thinking about what is the structure of your meetings and how is that impacting the process? So this is an example of an organization that I worked with recently, and this is what the meeting or the work we were doing looked like. And that everyone's huddled around. You can see in the back, there's another team working on a separate problem back there, but they've got this, big poster and they're kind of working through the different aspects of the problem. And the point here is there's a process for how the team's working together. One of the biggest questions that I get from my clients is on our team, at team meetings, usually only 2 to 3 people speak up, and the rest of the team is quiet. How do we get everyone to speak up? And the answer is you change your process. So if the only way you're having conversations is just everyone's talking and dialoguing together, then the people that are more extroverted or have more status, they're going to speak first, and the other people may not get that chance. But if you change it, so for instance, you're generating ideas and everyone's putting ideas on a post-it note rather than verbally sharing them, all of a sudden you're getting all the ideas at the table. And your team is like the team members are really smart. They're on your team for a reason. You want their input, you want their brains there. And so think about what's the process that your team is using to work together and think about how you might change that. All right. I've given you just a high level understanding of these different elements of team creative, deliberate creative teams. And there's much, much more. If you want to dig deeper, you can check out this book that I wrote, Deliberate Creative Teams, How to Lead for Innovative Results. Love it. Love all the, thanks, Blair. Thanks, Roger. Yeah, check this out. In fact, you can read more depth about the Mayo Clinic story if you're curious. And I'll put the link in the chat again for the book. And if you buy the book, there's a bunch of freebies that come with it that will be helpful for you, to be more creative together. All right, I just put the link in the chat. If you order this book from my website, then I'll send you a signed copy. I'll also send you a little cheat sheet that says "Be deliberate to be creative" and has like this little cheat sheet on the back. And you also get a sticker that looks like my t-shirt. So order that on my
Love the
website.
sticker.
You want a sticker, Roger?
Love the sticker.
Awesome. All right, I know we're close to the top of the hour, but if you all have any questions about deliberate creative teams, I'd be happy to even stay a little bit later, but I don't know if we have time for a question or two right now, Roger, if we should wrap up first.
Well, I think just a question or two would be great. But Amy, I just want to say this is a very sophisticated audience you worked with here today, and you really adapted well to this team. Just about everybody here, yeah, everybody here is training creative problem solving in some aspect or other, and most of folks have taken foresight. So great reading the room. So yeah, and thanks everybody for being here. But Amy, over to you and questions for our dear colleague and friend Amy.
Yeah,
Or comments.
yeah. Feel free to unmute. You can put it in the chat, whatever's easiest for you.
Amy, I have a question.
Sure.
I'll have a lot of questions, and if you don't mind staying a little later. But I think this one sort of impacts a number of us on this meeting, and that is that in academics, I find it extremely difficult to be creative. At least that's been my experience. There's a certain hierarchy, and they're very rule regimented. And when you're down, say in my position as a faculty coach, trying to implement creative change is extremely difficult. And Roger will tell you this. I say this all the time. Probably the other most important thing in your three things is culture. What is the culture? And if you don't have a culture that is open to change, it's very, very difficult. And I get it, but as a faculty coach, and I think Archon has probably seen this, Dan has seen this, when you try to introduce new ideas and innovative things and creative things to introduce into the curriculum, it is like, it's a brick wall. So how would you advise us?
It's a really tough challenge. I've been both a staff and a faculty at universities, and well, I don't work at one anymore. Not that that's the solution I'm suggesting, but I've felt that it's the change is glacial pace, and I think it's actually one of the biggest weaknesses of universities. So one of the things that I didn't get into here is what I found, and when I was just doing my literature review for the research, is there are these different elements that impact a team creativity from like internal to the team or external to the team. And so culture often is external to the team. Like this is impacting the team, but the team didn't create it, right? What's interesting is it doesn't have as much of an impact on team creativity as the actual, like what's happening inside the team. It's still a challenge. So I think that part of it is figuring out okay, where can we come in here? What's the approach that we need to take if, like, say, if you are trying to change the curriculum for a department? I think just first of all, knowing what is that process and knowing, yeah, at a university, that's going to be a minimum of a year, but maybe 2 to 3 year process, and figuring out what's the motivation? Like, what do the people who can make that change or who can like give you the thumbs up for it, what is their motivation? And being sure that you're speaking to that. And what I see a lot of times is that people who are really excited about change, they're bringing the change or the idea to the people that can make the decision, and they've completely missed the motivation that that team of decision makers has. And so figuring out, there's actually an episode of my podcast. I have a podcast called Deliberate Creative, oh my God, what is it called? The Deliberate Creative. And it's I'll find the episode in a few minutes, Robert, and I'll put it in there. But it's really about how do you present ideas to the decision makers so that those ideas are actually received and then acted upon. Um, yeah, give me as we're talking, I'll pull up that podcast episode and put it in the chat for you. But that may be a helpful starting point.
Amy, it looks like you have a hand up from Ken over there. So,
all right, Ken, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a follow-up to Dr. Gatewood's point. I'm interested in Sarah's comment. I feel like there's a sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
There's a critical and important element to this type of work in generating a new business or a new business idea. And then the rest of the foresight thinkers have to take over and let the business run. We'd be lucky to have a creative idea that actually becomes an effective business. Most don't last more than 10 or 15 years. And then creative people often create a new business or a new idea, and then the rest of the foresight team gets around execution, development, and moving forward. I'm not sure that the idea of a single company that constantly needs to flex and constantly develop new concepts is the way it actually works. And I'm going to transition over. This doesn't work in academics because we don't know how to assess creativity. That's why it's called an institution. It's an institution because it is not creative. It is a standardized assessment that we could put people through, engage them. We need better creative assessment tools that we could apply across the masses and the scales. And only when we have that will creativity become more embraced within institutions themselves. And so, again, I'd love to hear your comments, Sarah's comments, and maybe it's another lecture. This stuff applies to getting a business excited about a new idea, new development, and then hopefully they can create. This is not about how you do it in academics, and yet it's so important. And then the sad part we need to realize, creativity can't even be scaled for these kids for how successful they'll be. We know IQ works, we know certain other elements work, but until we can really assess creativity and tie it to something or goal, this will be our struggle. We know it's important. In fact, I think it's more tied to wellness. I think it's more tied to how we react to our environments and are able to deal with complexity of our environments than it is to some other measurement of success that we currently tie it to.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Ken. I'll just share a comment, and then Sarah, if you want to add anything. I'm definitely not an expert in creativity assessments, but I think that there are some that do measure creativity or aspects of creativity at least, but they're not like widely known. And so they're there. You got to dig a little bit. I actually don't know if that's the biggest problem. I think, and I think this even speaks to Robert's question too, is that I think universities are designed to do exactly what they're doing. And that universities are, while we, like this group here, we want them to be creative, they're not actually designed for that. And I don't think they want to do that at the end of the day. I mean, we're getting a little, maybe this is getting a little philosophical here, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think the same thing is the case with K-12 education. We absolutely have the capacity and the understanding and the know-how to foster creativity in each other, from, little kids up to college students and beyond, I don't think we really want it as a society, which is a little disheartening. But yeah, I don't know. It's something I've been thinking about the last couple of
No,
weeks.
I like where you're going with it, and I think it does tie back to our why. Like we're missing the why is this such a critical and important. Again, that's why I tie it to wellness. I think we haven't tied it to the right thing of why it's so critically important in our curriculum.
Ken, let me give you a little bit of hope here. I'm working with a school in Ohio that's being is being sponsored by an entrepreneur that just sold a major software company, putting a lot of funds behind this, and they're teaching we're teaching their trainers, their teachers, and their curriculum developers. They're using Great in a Flash as a curriculum. I'm delighted. And they're teaching life skills like goal setting, like emotional intelligence, like problem solving. And it is so exciting to be working on that. But it's done differently, separately than the institutions. So I'll keep you up. We might do something on this as that develops. I'll bring the folks in that are doing it. It's exciting stuff. So yeah, hopefully there's some help there, Ken. But to your point, Ken, it's done outside the established institution. They're creating a new organization to do this in a different way. So Sarah, did you want to comment on some of this, or maybe over to you? Ken, does that work? Does that help?
Yeah, but it does. And again, just adding before Sarah comments, the amount of time it takes to do this type of assessment is unbelievable as an instructor. Unless I've got an AI tool or an army that's going to help me read the 300 papers from everybody creatively, this becomes this is why people move to multiple choice tests, right? The amount, but we have to recognize in education that this takes an army, not just to execute, but to appropriately give feedback and assess.
And Ken, to your point, the original Creative Studies project in the early 1970s had to prove that creativity could be taught, and it was done at Buffalo State over the period of 2 years. But the assessments they threw everything they could at them, just every single assessment in the world. But it was a volume and a mountain of data. Okay, I'm going to jump off. Sarah, over to you. So.
No, such a great question and such a great conversation. And I feel like, at some level, uh, if you go very meta on this, organizations exist because they've figured out a way to create value. And once they figured that out, it's a rinse and repeat proposition.
Yes.
They innovate to create new value or to create growth or to create additional opportunity for value. And so that makes sense from a sort of organizational health thing. That's resilience, that's thriving, that's growth. And emotionally, what we know about from foresight is that people who have a preference to clarify, they might find that growth destabilizing, sort of undermining, sort of threatening. And so there is a real emotional component to managing creativity and bringing innovation and bringing new ideas in. People who are shutting that down aren't trying to suffocate the organization. They're trying to protect it. They're trying to prevent damage or destabilization. And so it's, in some ways, it's coaching ourselves to understand how we relate to change, how we relate to innovation personally and also emotionally, which is just not something that comes up in a conversation. But I guess from the perspective of foresight and giving people that assessment, it really helps drill down underneath the sort of cognitive, rational, semantic approach to creativity to understand you're also going to have an emotional response to it. And that's okay. That's totally human. And like Amy said, you can check yourself if you know that. But if you don't know that, your feeling is like, we cannot do that idea. That's a terrible idea. That could be catastrophic to, the health and wellness of our organization. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Sarah, thank you. Amy, we'll take one more question from Archana, and then we'll respect everybody's time and jump off. And respect your time. So, Archana.
I just wanted to add, thank you again, Amy, and thank you, Sarah, for succinctly putting that together, because that's what I've seen. I remember with the art of medicine, it was roadblocks after roadblocks, people wanting to shut down ideas. And then I think one of the forces for me that now has emerged is the students, because I mean, just it's hard to convince the administrators or the curriculum leads, but when the students experience it, that really is that shift that's needed. When I started this course, and again, just to say that, as you know, Sarah, that majority of the medical students ended up being clarifiers. So, so that was, that was another factor there, which was because they wanted the explanation for every session in detail as to how. I know the improv session was a disaster because they couldn't find that connection. So even though they laughed and danced, they couldn't, they weren't. But just to let you know that the last session that I had this semester, the response from the students was 99% of them said that the the session met or exceeded the expectation. I can't tell you how much joy that gave me, because I know that you cannot change the people who are set in the ways, but if the student body can then push for that change. I don't know, Dan was there. I was so impressed by their presentations, which they used music, dance, graphic arts, you name it. And it was, I can't tell you, it brought tears to my eyes. And it just shows that maybe, you can't get to the nose here. You got to turn around and, touch it in a different way, because, it took 2 decades for them to allow me to even have curricular time for the course. But I just feel that it is, and there's so many such great wisdom and tips that we've collected here, and I think I'm so grateful for it, and thank you again. I think I'm talking more than I should.
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Amy, I'm going
Congrats,
to take it over.
Archana.
Yeah, I'm going to take it over to you in just a second, Amy. And once again, Amy's book is Deliberate Creative Teams. And a wonderful book that goes along with that is Good Team, Bad Teams. So, and we have all the authors here with us today. So, Amy, you knocked it out of the park. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. We'll conduct these as stuff comes up. We've kind of taken a little hiatus for a little bit, but as other great stuff comes in, let me know. Amy, if we could just get your information in the chat. And there we go. That's how we can consult with her, is in the chat. So get a hold of her that way. I think we are adjourned. Any other, Amy, just back to you. Thank you. Any other things you want to just let us know about before we leave?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to connect with you if you're on LinkedIn. That's a good place to find me. And I put a bunch of links in the chat if you want to order the book, if you want to talk about some more training, or if you need a keynote speaker to talk about creativity in teams. And the thing I want to leave you with as you go forth and are working on being more creative is just to, be deliberate to be creative. So it won't happen by accident.
Great. Amy, thank you so much. Amy, if you'd stay on for a minute with Dr. Yates. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Have a great, great rest of the day. What a great way to start out a Thursday. It got me going. So this is why we do what we do, right, friends?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.